the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me a very special guest. Join me in welcoming Rohan Mirchandani, the co founder of one of India's most loved brands, Epigamia. Thank you so much, Rohan, for joining me. I'm incredibly delighted to be hosting you today.
Likewise, Javraj, absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Rohan. And I want to decode everything that Epigamia has done so well, especially because I know that everyone listening to this episode would have been touched by Epigamia in some shape or form. But before we get there, I want to first understand how an American-born Wharton graduate with an interest in finance and a job in banking comes to India and starts a food company, right? So if you can take us through that journey of maybe not just how you started, but also what was it like? Because in entrepreneurship, we often hear the beginner's mindset is important, having a fresh perspective is important. You've shown us in reality that, that plays to your favor and it's not a disadvantage. So if you can take us through that trajectory with an emphasis on that point, I think that'd be lovely to kickstart the discussion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the entrepreneurial journey is a very philosophical journey. So I think that's where things start. For me, as you rightfully mentioned, I went to undergrad in NYU Stern. I graduated. I worked in finance, and spent time after that working with my family business, which is what my father and brother do. And while I was doing that, I had come to India on a visit, and met some really cool people. One of them being one of my older co-founders, Chef Ganesh, who wanted to start an ice cream parlor. I had never intended or had any sort of vision of being in India or working in India or doing business in India. It was always a place you'd visit for visiting family or vacation, or for that matter weddings. That was always a big draw for familial weddings. And I got involved with as a sort of side investor, in an ice cream business, which was what I call our first version of this venture, which was Hoki Poki ice cream, which some of your listeners may have heard of or have tried. And honestly, it was never a focus for me. It was just some money I'd saved up on the side. It was something just as a passion, as an investor. And when I was in B school, I had sort of, that's when things really changed for me. I'd intended on going back into finance. And I took a class in India called Marketing to the Indian Consumer. I'd come with B school for a week-long immersion program, and was really blown away by what I saw that was happening on the ground. And it took some very interesting professors, guest lecturers that came. One of them being Shripad Nadkarni, who continues to be a mentor and on our board. And he spoke about the advent of consumer brands in India, and he said, you will see brands that are born in the next 10, 20 years that'll stand the test of time. And I think, every entrepreneur, we'll talk about having outsider's perspective, but I think you have that eureka moment, the Ghanti Baj Gayi moment, right? And for me, that's when I got shivers in my arms, and I said, wow, this looks like there seems to be a calling here for me. And I had this sort of, side hustle of the ice cream business, but of course I had never worked in the industry, had no idea what food was aside from being a consumer of it, a very passionate consumer of it. And that's where the journey started. I went back to Philadelphia, where I was in B school, stayed in touch with Shripad, and ended up having conversations with him and visiting him in India. And he finally said that, I'd love to help you with this. And there's a much larger picture here of building a consumer brand in the value-added dairy space, which eventually became value-added dairy and plant-based dairy. But he had three conditions for me. One was that actually two conditions for me. One was that, he'd like to be an investor and be involved. And the second condition was that I'd have to move to India full-time and do this as a full-time business, not just some side thing, right? And that was a big sort of philosophical learning for me that, with entrepreneurship, it's tough because you're always trying to make ends meet. There's no, in the beginning, there's no income coming in, right? You have to sort of do this purely for the love of it. And I always say it's also a very selfish journey because you have to give it all, it has to be 100%. And that's when that was one of my first learnings, that you have to be either all in or all out. I mean, you can do a side thing for a little bit to get things moving, but 6 months, 1 year max. And that's when I took a call, and against every advice of every friend, family member here in the United States, everyone's saying, are you out of your mind? You're going to go there. You've never lived there. You've never worked there. But I think coming back to what you were saying earlier, I think moving there in this industry, having no experience, I came with zero preconceived notion. And that's why I think, having that perspective really helped, in this venture, and we can talk about that more when we go along.
Absolutely. No, I think that's super fascinating to hear, and it's amazing how far you've come since that time. But it's interesting, no story about Epigamia isn't complete without the pivot that happened, right? So you went from ice cream to the yogurt as we know it, and multiple other products that are there in the suit now. Apart from understanding, okay, why that happened, can you also tell us some maybe tangible numbers of knowing how it happened, or knowing when the time to pivot happens, right, without giving it any fancy terms like pivot or anything of the kind, but when did you know that, okay, this is not working, okay, these are my signals, and this might be the more logical step to continue and build out a brand from, right? This is going to be my superstar product that I'm going to follow through, and then we're going to build a brand on top of it, build distribution on top of it. If you can take us through that bit, especially in what it meant at that moment as opposed to what we're seeing right now, I think that would be super interesting for everyone listening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, and I completely echo sort of, you said it in a very kind way. I mean, pivot is a very overused word, and I'm not so sure I subscribe to the definition of that word. I don't think I still know what it means, but let's sort of, I mean, let's talk about the journey instead, and see how things sort of transpired. And I think what, we started with packaged ice cream. I mean, that was sort of the first, real thing when I moved. We had an ice cream parlor, but that was the business plan that I had built. And the idea was always to get into more products. But of course, the first foray was packaged ice cream. And one of the leading blogs called us India's answer to Ben and Jerry's, which is always an exciting one for us. Remember, that was the first media attention we got, which was amazing. The reality was that, I think the first step is, are you really aware of what's happening inside your business, right? I mean, that's, I'm coming back to this word pivot and breaking down the parts. What's actually going on? What is the product market fit? What's working? What's not working? And I think what we sort of came to terms with very quickly was that we had a good product market fit. I mean, it was being liked by consumers. It just wasn't. It was a very different dynamic. Seasonality played a very huge role on the ice cream business in India. So you had large businesses that had been built very regionally over time, and we were trying to build a premium national business. And these large businesses that are sort of more local businesses that had been built over time, had the luxury of being in business for 50 years, 75 years, 80 years, where they had, only those few months of the year where the real heavy consumption happened. But they'd been doing this for so long, they had a very good base, right? And that's what we sort of came to terms with, is that things like rainy season, literally ice cream consumption just drops off the cliff, winter season in northern areas. I mean, there's some tradition around having ice cream in the winter in Delhi, but it's more, sort of, it's in the film world. It's not a reality, right? There's not consumption doesn't go up. In fact, when it's cold out, people are not feeling well, they don't have ice cream. And that's something that, we had to sort of learn the hard way, because when we first started, we scaled like crazy. But what we didn't realize is that crazy scaling happened in the months of March, April, May, and June. And by the time July came around, especially because we were based in Mumbai, the business less than halved, right? And we started sort of questioning what it was, and we started putting efforts behind marketing, which honestly made no sense, because it was a market reality. So we had a product market fit as far as the consumer was concerned, but in terms of the business market reality, we didn't really see what, we didn't have a forecast on this. And this could be this is probably some of the negative part of the naivete that I brought in coming from the United States, thinking where, I'm from New York, where we have a real winter where it snows, we have a real summer where it's really hot, we wear shorts. So I'm sure India is going to be consuming ice cream all year round, which was far, far from the truth. And that's what sort of led us to, and again, I wouldn't call it a pivot. I would call it was more of a business addition for us, where we always wanted to do more products. And what sort of the insight that we drew from there was twofold. One was, look at a product that's not that seasonal. I mean, every product has some seasonality in India, but at least, can be consumed year round, right? And secondly, because of the ice cream business, because of some of the parlors we had and the time I spent, we realized that there was this huge shift towards healthier lifestyle, wellness eating. And especially some of the same consumers that were eating our ice cream were saying, we have it maybe once a week or twice a month. It's not a daily product, right? It's a cheat meal, or it's a celebratory product. It's not a lifestyle product. And using these two insights, we launched Greek yogurt. Of course, we'd gotten good at, where we were getting our ingredients from, and Chef came with a great product. But initially, Jivraj, the idea behind Greek yogurt was not to pivot, as the word, again, I don't know what that word means, but if that's the right terminology, it was actually an addition to the ice cream business. The idea was to work them together and get a lot of synergies out of it, especially on the raw material sourcing, because a lot of the ingredients were similar. And then also, of course, on the distribution front, in terms of the stores we would sell to. More importantly, they would be synergistic because during these other months, Greek yogurt would be very stable, and then ice cream would give us the spurts in the summer months. And that's really what the initial sort of the plan evolved into. I like that word better than pivot. It evolved in that direction. Where I think the change came is when we realized that we had gotten some really good insights from the ice cream business, from the market, which we put all behind launching Greek yogurt. And where the Hoki Poki ice cream came below what we had forecasted, especially given the summer seasonality issues. Epigamia, Greek yogurt just blasted all our projections. I mean, we had no idea that this is how successful it would be. And then where the real change in business came is when we had to take a decision: are we going to be able to run two brands? Especially one which is now doing 4 to 5x of the other one. And we also came to another market reality, which we hadn't sort of prepared for, is that it sounds so easy and straightforward in the beginning, but when you're actually in the business doing so many things, it's not so straightforward. Is that very different supply chains? One requires frozen and one requires chilled, very different temperatures. We thought we could do it in cartons and crates with dry ice inside. It's a separate discussion for a separate day. And that's really where the business then dictated, the data dictated where you want to go. So to your point earlier, when you have a business, when you've launched something as an addition to synergy, which is synergistic with how that, so you're evolving the business, but it starts doing 5 times what your core business was doing before. Those are some very straightforward decisions one takes. And that's when we decided that we couldn't build 2 brands, we couldn't run 2 supply chains. And this required all the tender love and care that we were supposed to give it. Even though Hoki Poki is always my first child, I have equal love for it. Business sort of dictated, and hence, this pivot, or as I like to call the evolution, happened of the business.
Got it. I think that's, again, very, very interesting. I think the insight there is you have to follow the numbers. You have to be intellectually honest to what's genuinely working, what's not, and what's going to be in the long haul most beneficial for the organization. So I think I love that. A lot of ingrained insights there for everyone, especially somebody building a new brand or a new company out there. So super to hear that. I think 2 parts what I want to double click on. One is the supply chain bit. I'll come to that in a bit. But considering that while yogurt and what you've built with Epigamia seems very intuitive now, I would love to understand that, considering at the start there could have been reservations around seeing a new product. What does Greek yogurt mean? What is this about? We don't see this very often and things like that. So when you look at category creation in the consumables industry, right? Like if you're doing it with SaaS and other products, it's fairly intuitive because it's a new product, you can try it out. But I'm guessing with consumables, it's different, right? So if you can take us through that part of the journey where it was a new product launching, what was the reaction like? And what did you think about launching a different category by itself? Because now we think of yogurt and simultaneously, Epigamia pops in our mind, and that's been the distance you've covered. But if you can take us to the initial parts of building a category by itself, I think that I'd love to hear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you alluded to the right things. There's so many meetings, investors, advisors who said, you haven't seen this ice cream journey through yet. What is wrong with you of launching a new product, right? And I think, I'll start with a different view, and then we'll get into the category creation. What I find very interesting, and this is again changed in a big way, and the next gen of entrepreneurs that are now, who have come out in India the last 3-4 years, are just crushing it on this concept. But when I first moved in 2013, it's been almost 9 years now. This notion of sunk cost, the sunk cost fallacy, as they call it. I found it to be very rare. This idea of, if it's not working, don't keep putting resources behind it. Take that call early on. And I think that's something that really drove us in the right direction. And we've had this notion, and I say that very clearly. Things have changed drastically with this new age entrepreneurs, but the old thinking was, I've put so much behind this, itna paisa lagaya hai, that you just want to see it through. and you're not honest with yourself, like you said, you're not intellectually honest with yourself that this is not working, man. Dude, you got to move on, right? And I think that's where we had a lot of pushback when we first looked at this next but then we sort of sold it to ourselves that it was a synergistic value addition to the core. It wasn't just a new product launch, to your point. I mean, of course it was a new product launch, it was a new category launch, but for us, again, being sort of very simplistic, naive entrepreneurs, we just simply looked at this: raw material sourcing will be the same, production facility we can use similar, even though that also had to change once we scaled. And then the stores we would sell to would be similar. We have a social media team handling, one social media handle. They can handle two social media handles, and that was the very simplistic sort of view. Where we sort of came out is when this scaled as fast as it did. I mean, it was just insane. Again, we had obviously done something right in our calculations as to what the market needs were and what the stores wanted, and what the big modern trade guys wanted to keep on their shelves. All that played out very well. Once that sort of hit home, to your point, now you went from ice cream, which was playing in a very established category. Now we were trying to premiumize that category, but it was a very established category. Whereas yogurt, even though a lot of people tried to lump it in as part of the curd category, it is nothing like curd. It's uniquely different. And one of the things we took on, and I think one of our early successes, was to sort of position this as not as a flavored curd or a variation of curd, which is why we specifically went after calling it yogurt, and Greek yogurt for that matter, is to also give it an independent identity when we talk about category creation, right? So when you talk about category creation, what is it really? What does that mean, to specifically answer your question? And what that means is it's not just about the product, it's about the consumption pattern as well as the occasion. I think the occasion becomes very critical when you talk about category creation. And we really pushed hard on this notion of our product being a snack versus being used as a curd replacement. And that's something that we push really hard on. And I urge your listeners to think about occasions, because that's one area that, especially when you're creating a consumer food category or creating consumer food brand, we tend to overlook how important occasions are. So if you look at traditional curd consumption, it's always part of the meal. You're having it with your roti or your paratha, or as a side pocket to biryani, or in many occasions it's at the end of a meal. You finish your meal and it's a digestive, which is happening, dahi chahiye baad mein. And that's traditionally ingrained for I don't know how many years in the country, right? And for us, it was very clear that we won't win if we fall under the curd category, because we'll just be looked at an expensive foreign curd. That's really what we will be looked at. And that's an insight we garnered very early on. And for us, what was very important in this category creation journey was to coin an occasion. And we went after our Greek yogurt being a snack. So it comes to high protein content. There's a lot of functionality there. Of course, it's thick, it's viscous, it has a differentiation from curd. And we really, really pushed the idea of an after workout snack at the workplace, in between meals. We called it the choti si bhook snack, right? So the hunger that you have between lunch and dinner at 4 or 5 p.m. And we anchored ourselves in that, and that's something we spent a lot of time on in all our communication, really, really honed in on that being the anchor. So we called it the Batman Robin effect. And what I mean by that is, Robin is the sidekick to Batman. So, that he was always the sidekick to a bigger meal, and it continues to be. That's the role it plays. And we wanted to create Greek yogurt as Batman without, we didn't want it to be a Robin. We wanted it to be a unique event. And that's where we spent a lot of time. And I think that's what really, the category creation journey means, is not just that the product is unique in terms of a category, but the occasion that you're going to be consuming this product in, that really helps define a different category.
That's fabulous. I think a lot of food for thought there, especially with the occasion point that you mentioned. And I think lots to think about for everyone listening. But very quickly understanding, I think Epigamia is one of those brands which was not online first, right? And you mentioned this in the past. You've gone from offline to online to now offline, online both. And we see this trend where now the digital first brands are also, of course, eventually moving offline as well, because the truth is that the consumer is at each place and there is a large chunk of the consumer still buying offline products, right? So if you can just help us, take us through the trajectory that you've seen brands evolve from. Also, of course, how Epigamia has evolved through this trail, and how do you think the next age of brands are going to get formed in that aspect of, which channels to dominate from, and how important is it to have that clarity early on, if at all? I think that would be super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is obviously the discussion of the hour right now, right? In all the boardrooms
Yeah.
is where does this go from here, and what has happened? So very clearly, COVID disrupted online, right? And we saw what happened. I mean, the adaptation, the urgency of getting online became very important to all businesses. Of course, consumers took a different, consumer businesses and consumer food, which none of us really thought would go in that route, took that route. So, you've asked for some stats before. I'll happily share a stat. So we, pre-COVID, our e-commerce, our digital business, so all levels of digital, was about 4 to 5%. Today we're sitting on close to 32% of our business being through online, and that number is going to be a lot larger, and because this is just what we see, because there are a lot of modern trade accounts, or even local, what we call the local modern trade. So kirana shops that are in places like Bangalore and Hyderabad, which have more than one, maybe two or three, but very restricted to that city, but also provide online. You can order on WhatsApp and you can deliver. And for that matter, even today, a kirana shop, you can order on WhatsApp and they deliver. You're not communicating on the phone. So what's really digital anymore, right? What qualifies as e-com and digital anymore? So if I was to actually probably break that down and make some assumptions, I bet you 45 to 50% of our business is coming online today, which in a fresh, short shelf life business is absolutely unheard of, right? It doesn't make any sense. So what happened and what's going to happen, right? Let's answer the two questions that you brought up. So number one, offline always has had a friction, right? So the moat for offline has always been building distribution, build your distribution, build your distribution, build your distribution. And that's what, honestly, very straightforward journey that we took on when we started Epigamia. We need to get to 200,000 stores as fast as we can. I mean, we're up to close to 30,000 now, but we're on our way still, as fast as we can. And that's what once those storekeepers, the consumers in those stores like the product, there's a loyalty that's been built. That becomes your moat, which is hard to penetrate for a newcomer, right? And that was the traditional way of doing it. Then we went to this other, now with COVID happening and with our food business, because food is something that would be the end of the spectrum when it comes to e-com. Everything else is easy because with food, it's perishable. You've got shelf life constraints, et cetera, planning for inventory. And obviously with people sitting at home during lockdown, people working from home during COVID, that just accelerated. And it wasn't just an India phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. It happened everywhere in the world as we see it. What surprised us is the tailwinds that we saw with that business, right? The way it took off for us, people sitting at home and consuming. And now, of course, with the Q-commerce coming into picture, the quick commerce guys who are now, my fastest way of getting my own product is vis-a-vis quick commerce, not my own team. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 hour, whatever that number is, depending on which part of the country you live in or which service you're using. That's seen another proliferation in terms of the e-com business, right? Because now you've got a product, as I mentioned earlier, you want it consumed during your choti si book time, which is that 4 or 5 p.m. time. You can literally just order 2 cups and in 10 minutes it reaches you and you're consuming it. So that's created another interesting sort of evolution or proliferation if we look at the journey. Now, where distribution had the original distribution strategy, there was a lot of friction, because what ended up happening is you were creating the distribution, but you were also trying to create awareness within this distribution, right? So it required a lot of effort. It required a lot of marketing rupees. It required a lot of, energy. And the way I actually don't like the word sort of awareness, because that's a word that all marketing departments use. We have awareness. What I like to use for us startups is discovery, right? Discovering the brand, learning about it. And what online has done is it's removed friction from discovery. So now discovering a product or discovering a brand, and it's just a simple function of browsing on an e-commerce platform or on a quick commerce platform, or just doing your own research around it. And that to me is the big game changer going forward, where so if we look at sort of, let's simply define it as pre-COVID, post-COVID. I think those are simple line in the sand, right? For at least for our business, and I'd say for any consumer perishable business. So pre that, you had distribution friction and you had awareness friction, right? Because you now had to do distribution, awareness, discovery, all in some sense offline. Yeah, you had online, social media, you could do stuff like that, but that was just communication. That was just a new media channel. It wasn't necessarily, leading to less friction. Now you've come on where discovery is happening online. So you have, you've removed that friction from discovery. And now you can consume online, but, we still have very good, distribution in the country. You've got stores everywhere, kirana shops, this, that. So accessibility, even though quick commerce is changing a lot of that, but quick commerce isn't there all over the country yet. And people do still like to get out and pick something up from their local shopkeeper, right? So what changes now is, and this is coming back to answer your question, this partnership of offline online is absolutely essential going forward. And our sort of thesis now and our sort of view is that offline is going to be still continue to be very important. So we see offline and online, we think over time it'll become a 50-50 split for us. Right now it's officially a 30-70 split, but I think it's probably more like a 40-60 split. Because we supply Reliance Fresh, people are buying from Geo, it's coming from their shop. So does that qualify as e-com or not? And that's the other thing, the lines are getting gray, right? We don't know what's e-com or not anymore. If your local kirana shop is taking orders from you on WhatsApp, is that e-com or is it not? You're also paying on WhatsApp, you're paying him on Paytm, and then his delivery guy comes and delivers. So is that online or not? We don't know. But what we know is that the moat will continue to be distribution, building a robust back-end supply chain and distribution. But discovery now has been outsourced to online, or has been the friction is gone on discovery. So a very simple example, I know I'm taking a long time to answer, but I think it's very important for your listeners to understand this move. A very simple example is for us, right? So we have, we're predominantly a tier 1, major tier 2 business, maybe 12, 15 cities. Now, last 1.5 to 2 years, we've disrupted and we've now gone into close to 90 cities, right? So one city that was not really on our radar, we knew it had a good population, is a city in southern Maharashtra called Ichalkaranji. I don't know if you ever heard of it or some of your listeners have. So exactly. It's not far from Kolhapur, right? And in Ichalkaranji, we didn't have it on our list of cities to go into, but Reliance Jio had set up an operation there where they had set up an online mart, right, where you could order online. And because they're fantastic partners, we went in there with them. And through that, we had discovery happen. So people were on their phones, on their apps, learning about Greek yogurt and our milkshakes. We started to see some traction. Now that we've got a city with a discoverability option available, it made sense for us to now start expanding distribution there. So we've now started supplying stores. I think we're probably up, I don't know the exact number, but 50, 75 stores that we're supplying to there. Plus, but it all started with that e-com discoverability. Rewind 5-7 years ago, we would have had to start with distribution, which would have, again, high friction. And then we'd have to do some kind of, billboards or inserts in newspapers, and again, high friction. And the return on effort and capital would have been extremely low. So that's where this whole game changes now in terms of this, online, offline convergence. And like I said, a very hairy gray area. I don't know if that answers the question. I know it was a long answer, but.
No, I think that's very, very helpful. I think it breaks it down, especially in terms of consumables and the consumer industry very, very well, that's especially in terms of perishables. And I think that's going to be very helpful in terms of young builders who are looking at this industry. But what's interesting is if we talk about present day and how far the product has come, especially in terms of building on top of distribution, right? Because from what I could gather, for a long time it was expanding on top of yogurts, ensuring that proper evangelism happens on it, and then we've recently seen a surge into types of products, and now milkshakes as well. There are spreads, and you've gone into other categories like plant-based, and a bunch of other things are happening, right? Talk to us about the mindset that goes into this, right? How have you, gone about building this, and also in terms of strategy, right? How have you thought about what comes when, and how long, or what does a product launch at Epigamia look like, right? Like, do you plan months in advance? Do you, or do you like do a very quick weekly test or something of the kind? Where does the innovation come from? If you can take us through this like entire flywheel, right, that leads to the innovative side of the company and keeps the consumer on its toes with newer products that dominate its life cycle, I think that would uncover a bunch of trade secrets that have led to the massive success of Epigami and hopefully continue doing so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd love to tell you there's some scientist that sits behind the scenes and does something, but I mean, I think the reality, Javraj, is at our core, we're a product company. That's who we are. That's what we do, right? And we've learned, the hard way and the soft way, that our consumers are very demanding on seeing newer and newer products from us, and also on it's our DNA to launch newer and newer products. Now, what that means is it falls under this strategy of contemporizing modern Indian dairy, right? So we're very clear about that. That's why you'll see we've got our take on the lassi, which is our smoothies. We've got our take on the plant-based industry now. So we've got a vegan range, we got lactose-free range. So really looking at disrupting and contemporizing this very old ancient dairy industry. However, for us, product launches, like I said, it's so core to who we are. And at least while I remain CEO, unfortunately or fortunately for the team, our motto on product launches is fail fast. It's very important. So what we've come to reality with is you can take a year or 2 years of Nielsen data research and just keep going and going, and really it becomes paralysis by analysis, right? You just don't end up going anywhere. And I remember I'd given a talk to a very large FMCG company, to their team, about this, and they stood up and gave me a round of applause. And my take was, by the time you guys do your research and get your initial research data together, which takes 2 to 3 months, we've already launched that product, seen if it works or not, or removed it if it doesn't, right? That's the core of who we are, is try it out, fail fast. Now, obviously, as we get larger, it becomes a little bit harder to do that. However, we have put a little bit of structure. Now we're getting a little bit better at that. But our structure is still very sort of entrepreneurial driven, right? So we have what we call an alpha and beta test. We look at the tech world for inspiration. And very simply, there's a lot of insight that comes from the marketing team, from the sales team, and R&D. We have a very very fantastic R&D lab, and we call it the innovation kitchen. And there's constantly new products being churned out. I mean, literally on a daily basis. I spend most of my time just tasting, and there are things that we're thinking about short term, long term, but there's constant churning happening. There are constant briefs being sent in on what to look at, how to look at. A lot of this is driven by me. I look at consumer trends globally. I look at consumer trends in India. I see when a thing's going to happen. I'm probably their biggest pain because I'm sending stuff to them all the time. Once we get a sense of something that's good, we think there's some interest amongst the management team for this. We do what we call an alpha testing, which means the internal Epigamia team will taste the product, right? There'll be product. There's a core group that does it, but there's a larger group. And then at the end of the day, it becomes fun. Whoever's in the office that day is tasting. You get some initial feedback, and we found that immediate feedback is important. You have to look at cohorts, obviously, but look at that. And if we feel it passes that alpha test, then it goes for a beta test. The beta test is essentially, and we've launched our own D2C website now. So we've got some D2C consumers. Of course, it's not a big part of our business, but that's where we go out to them, because we know these are loyal consumers that really care about the company, about the brand. We get their feedback, so we get some sense from them. What are they liking? What are they not liking? And we've been very careful about the feedback as well, because some of this stuff can become very subjective. And I think over time we figured out what makes sense, what doesn't. Once we get that, we have a group of about 200 odd stores across cities, mainly in Mumbai though, which we think are a good litmus test if this is going to work or not. And we quickly go into those stores. Those shopkeepers love us. They love working with us because we've helped them grow an entire category that never existed prior to. And my philosophy, our philosophy, is that until you really get people spending rupees from their hard-earned money on your product, you're not getting real feedback. That's the real feedback, right? And once we see some pattern of a repeat there, then we're convinced we've got something. Then we hit the pedal. And sometimes even once we go through those steps, we see failure. It's not that it doesn't. The key for us is making sure you fail fast and remove, because that is what is going to make or break us, right? So for example, we've launched many products in the last sort of 2 years, especially during COVID. People sitting at home were even more demanding. Some of them have not are on their way of being removed. Not going to see that, going to see it, and some of them have hit home. Like our milkshakes have just dominated. They've scaled so fast. It's the fastest product launch in our history. But the reality is that all of them had the same approach. I love to tell you that milkshakes had a better approach than something else that got pulled, but it didn't. They all had equal love and care and approach. But that's what sees us, sort of move forward. But again, key is understanding that the sunk cost fallacy, right? It's sunk, it's gone, remove, move on. And that's what and we will continue doing that as we move forward.
Brilliant. I think that again is very, very helpful as an entire process and talks a lot about, okay, adopting that, agile mindset and actually delivering on top of it. So love that. I think, going further as we, go to the end parts of the conversation, I'd love to also uncover how you've continued staying close to the consumer. And the famous story is that, I think you spent around 6 months serving ice cream in its original form. And I think you've carried down that culture forward, carried forward that culture with the company as well. So talk to us about what customer insights look like at scale, and especially how deliberate one needs to be to continue doing so, because I'm guessing that you probably can't do everything the consumer demands for either, right? So if you can talk to us about that conundrum and especially how that's evolved over time and how you've been deliberate about it, I think that'll be great, because we've heard customer is the king a lot of times, but uncovering some real insights there would be really fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, early on, that was my sort of genesis was the time I spent in the parlors, the time I spent talking to consumers. That translated later on to the stores, spending a lot of time at stores, with the promoters doing sampling, and that's where you got some of the best conversations out. I think today, obviously, we are a much larger organization now, and we've got teams, and we do spend some money on research here and there, even though I'm still not a big believer in it. I think the teams like to validate, so I'm okay with it. But where I think a bulk of it comes is still from the sales force. I think the sales force being out there, we encourage them to have conversations at the stores. And secondly, I break it down today where we stand. I'd say there's three sort of main elements to where we're getting our insights from. And again, I'm very involved in this piece of it. The first insight is what's happening in the stores. So continuing that dialogue with the shopkeepers, and not that they have all the answers, but at least you get a sense of the problems, right? What are people asking for? What are they looking for? Do they want this? Do they want that? And also sort of being able to filter the noise, because just one vocal consumer saying something doesn't mean everybody wants that, right? You have to be very clear about that. So that's one side of it. And that is still a very core part of how we go forward. The second part of it is this D2C consumer base that we've built now. I mean, it's a small base, maybe 10,000 odd consumers, but it's a pretty good portion in terms of data crunching. Now, the bias there is they are very loyal consumers. So you're going to get, some very loyal bias from them. And from those shopkeepers, you'll get the offbeat one-off biases, because the person who's the most vocal will be heard. So you have to sort of synthesize both and filter both to see what makes sense. And then finally, I think just the equivalent of sitting in the ice cream parlor and listening to people talk is just looking at comments today, right, on social media, constantly. And I still very religiously look at every comment that is there. Sometimes there are thousands of comments on a post. And obviously, again, you have to filter what makes sense or not, because a lot of people are just, bashing you or doing things like that. And I've developed a little bit of a thicker skin. I used to get very agitated when I saw those negative comments. And I've come to learn that that's just a part and parcel of being on social media. But I think they're sort of taking all three buckets, filtering them, synthesizing them, and then mapping it on, just the economy. Where are things headed in the country? So here you get a sense of what people are looking for, but where are things headed? How are things sort of evolving? What are some trends outside of the country that we've seen played out within the country? Are those coming soon? So there's a lot of mapping that happens. So I'd say these are the three areas where we get the consumer sort of commentary. We filter that into insights for us. And then we map it against trends that are happening within the country, financially and sort of market driven, and then trends that have happened outside. And that's where we sort of start, it sounds a lot more formal than it is. It happens very informally, but then we start spitting out where things are going to go and where we see products coming. And that's sort of the equivalent of those conversations I used to have it happen at the ice cream parlor back in the day, which I miss very dearly.
Got it. No, I think that's lovely to hear and very core to any business, and thus very important to get iterated. I think the next, I mean, I want to quickly touch upon this theory you have, and you've spoken about this in the past, but you talk about this value conscious consumer that India is, right? And not the price conscious consumer. I mean, I leave it up to you, but if you can just decode that and how you've looked at, the value aspect of the brand building journey as well as the products that you've built with vis-a-vis the consumer. I think I'd love to know that and dive deeper into it just quickly.
Yeah, so I have a very clear take, and obviously this is something that we built our thesis on. Every market has a price conscious a buyer, right? That exists everywhere. It's not just in India or America or Europe thing. But what we tend to do is we start qualifying the larger bucket of the market as price conscious buyers. And the reality is that's not true. The reality is that we live in a very value conscious society in India. What that means is I don't mind spending because consumer spending is happening. The velocity of money is moving, right? Of course, there's some issues given inflation and all that, which are external factors, exogenous factors that we don't know what's going to play out. But they don't mind spending. The question is, what am I getting in return for that? What am I able to do with what I'm spending on? I think a great example is just the proliferation of smartphones in India. Of course, they were made available at a price that was of value. If you look at the actual absolute price of phones, they're expensive. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
Even people with lower incomes, are still spending a significant part of their income on those phones. Why? Because they're getting so much functionality and usage out of it. There's a value that's derived from those phones. Similarly, with our Greek yogurt, initially when we launched, there was a huge pushback that it's so expensive. It's on the higher price point side, right? But the minute you start to decode it, the minute you start to say one Greek yogurt is the equivalent of 3 cups of dahi that are meshed together, okay? One Greek yogurt is the equivalent of 3 times the amount of protein you get in a cup of dahi, right? That one Greek yogurt, if it's a flavored version, has these fresh mango chunks in it, pieces in it, strawberries in it. And you start telling, and this is the mindset of the consumer, that if I start deconstructing this and try making this at home myself, it's going to cost me more than what I will pay for buying this ready packaged. And that's where our thesis on this value-driven consumer. There's been some very interesting products that have been launched in the last few years, some fresh juices of that nature, did not see similar sort of tailwinds, because the minute you start saying, I can make this fresh juice at home and my price is similar or maybe lower than what I'm getting it outside, why would I pay that, right? And so it's not a function of the actual rupee that's going out. It's a function of the value that I'm deriving from what I'm spending on. And I think that's something that marketers have to be very conscious of going forward, especially in this world of discovery. I think this world of discovery is going to really play out the value conscious theory of the Indian consumer.
Lovely. I think I love that when I first came across it in one of your past interviews, and I want that to be, mentioned here as well. So love that explanation. I think one of the last portions on company building post, which, we conclude with a couple of last personal questions, is the aspect around, let's say, the operations bit or the supply chains that Epigamia has beautifully built, right? Let's say as a consumer, I only get to see the end product, but there's a lot happening at the background, right? So if you can give us some context as to not the glamorous side of entrepreneurship, but the hard hitting on the ground operational bits, and also the cold chain aspects of how difficult it is to manage supply in the business that you are. I think that would just give us a lot of these hard hitting truths that can help us develop a lot of empathy, not just for the company, but also for entrepreneurship as a principle.
Yeah, no, and this one I can go on for hours and hours, but I'll try to keep it restricted in my answer. I mean, the reality for us, Javraj, is we had a 20-day, 18 to 20-day shelf life. Now, when you think about the context of that and supplying the whole country with that product, by the time it leaves the factory, by the time it goes through the dirty supply chain, as I like to call it, the grinding supply chain, and it reaches the shelf, it probably has maybe 10 or 11 or 12 days left max, right? And out of that 10, 11, 12 days, you really look at 70% of that time frame when someone will consume it. Because if the product has maybe 2-3 days left on the shelf, if it's, today's the 12th of April, if the expiry is 15th April, no one's buying it, right? It's going to go into expiry. So really, if you think about it, that poor guy has only 7 days to sit on that shelf and sell himself, right? And that's where we've learned that just inventory control, managing those inventories, managing the cold chain, actually became the core competence. Where we thought we will probably spend a lot of the money that we raise, the capital that we raise in the fundraise, the typical thinking is it's going to go towards marketing and awareness, which of course we did spend a little bit there, but actually the bulk of the investment that we took, from institutional money went towards building this back end, this cold chain. We opted not to have our own manufacturing for this reason, because we realized that if we took on our own manufacturing, that would create more complexities. We had to manage this cold chain very well, from the factory to the store. And in the beginning, when we first launched, we were begging distributors to take on our product, literally on our knees, and they told us to get lost. And we realized that, so we kind of fell into this. We realized that the only way to do this is to build it ourselves. And then when we started on that journey, we got really good at it. And that's where we've sort of, spent the time, energy, and effort. So coming back to what you were saying, there's so many nuances that go into it, because you have to manage inventory. You have to make sure that it leaves on time, because even if you lose one day, and in the Indian context, that happens all the time, the trucks get stopped, anything can happen, kuch bhi ho sakta hai. And in this case, you lose one day, that's 1 out of 7 days on the shelf. That's a significant loss in terms of the business, right? Because there is going to be a forecast that most likely that'll come back as an expiry or a return. And, that's something that we've spent most of our time working on. We've developed our own forecasting models. It's hard. It's interesting, when we actually grow fast, we struggle a little bit there, and there's always a complaint from sales that, we're not getting enough supply. But at the end of the day, we have to be so robust in our forecasting. Otherwise, the whole business can go for a toss, which it does. And we've spent a lot of time developing our own sort of indigenous solutions in terms of cardboard boxes with dry ice, depending on the volumes. Of course, we use a lot of reefer, cold, fully refrigerated trucks. We work with a lot of companies that are doing some really cool sort of solutions on eco-sustainability, in terms of usage of different types of technologies. We continue to be on the forefront of that. But this is sort of now, whether we liked it or not, become our core competence. That is our business, essentially.
Fair enough. No, I think that's again heartening to hear and refreshing to know, because I think large part of the narrative is based around the brand, but there's so much happening at the background, and it's wonderful to echo that. I think Rohan, as we end this, there's another great theory that you mentioned of transitioning from an entrepreneur to a CEO. And considering that it's been a reasonably large time since you've now been building Epigamia, if you can take us through the transition that you have been through personally, right, from figuring out and being an outsider in the food industry or even India, to now having established a brand and being on this journey of successfully taking it to other countries as well. How have you, scaled as an individual? What are some transitions that you have personally gone through? And how has that entrepreneur to CEO shift taking place? I think all of us would love to know that.
Yeah, I'll definitely answer that question when I figure it out myself. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think it's a very, and I've talked about it before, this sort of journey from entrepreneur to CEO. And people, when they think outside, they tend to think it's the same thing. It's so far removed from each other, right? That's why good entrepreneurs are good entrepreneurs and good CEOs are good CEOs, and very few are both, right? And when we look at it as an entrepreneur, you're very much driven by hustle, by ground realities. You're scrappy, you're able to get up every day and just go out there and do what's needed, right? You're ready to do anything. You'll get your hands dirty with everything. And that's something that I think myself, my co-founder Rahul, my other co-founder Uday, that we're good at that. That's like our thing, right? And I don't think you'll ever remove that from us. You'll never take the entrepreneur out of us. We like to build things. We're ready to get our hands dirty and do anything, right? We don't think twice. As you sort of build an organization, which is what we've done, and now we've brought in some fantastic sort of partners who are leading the journey for us. Pankaj, who joins us from Johnson & Johnson and Raymond, Senthil, who's on board as well, and Yatish on the R&D and supply chain side. I mean, these guys are just so much brighter, smarter than we will ever will be. Just amazing professionals, understand how to scale things, right? Understand how to plan, organize, institutionally scale things. And in this journey, I've been designated this title of a CEO, and my thought process is, what do I know? These guys really know how to do it, right? And that's where you sort of now think through that, what is a CEO? And the CEO, and again, something I'm learning is, what is the best use of my time? you know um, it's clearly not sitting and telling Senthil what to do in terms of ingredients he's putting in. I can give some high level consumer insight, but he's the scientist. He's going to be able to do that far better than I can, right? So what it ends up being is, sort of, as a CEO, galvanizing the team, working with them, sort of demonstrating leadership in some sense. Again, I don't know what that means. I'm still trying to figure that out. But it's a very different sort of day-to-day thinking than it was as an entrepreneur, when literally everything you were doing, you had your hands on, right? And today, I think the first step of becoming a CEO is sort of having that self-awareness that your hands on something is probably not the best thing for the company right now. You've got someone who's far more capable, far brighter than you, far more intelligent than you, who is now on board and should be doing that. And I think that's the balancing act, as I still transition from entrepreneur to CEO, and maybe I never will, I don't know. as that journey goes, we'll figure it out. But it's a very, very different mindset, very different thinking. But hopefully at some point I'll crack the code.
Absolutely. I think I love how candid you've been there. It's very interesting to understand that distinction and know how evolutionary of a journey it is. I think for the second last question, Rohan, I would love to know any broad principles or guiding, values that have led to where you are. I think that becomes a very core component of guiding anybody on a journey that entrepreneurship is, right? So if you can talk to us about what keeps you up, or what generally drives you, or any guiding principles that you uphold on a day-to-day level, I think we all would love to know that.
Yeah, so again, I'll get a little philosophical, and I might have said this before, but just sort of the few things. Number one, understand that entrepreneurship is very selfish. You're doing it for yourself. Don't convince yourself otherwise. Yes, the benefits at some point your family will have, but this requires every level of commitment: time, energy, resources, financial, and it's not an easy journey. It's not for everybody, right? That's one thing. We always see like you said, you see the nice, fancy, dreamy side of it. You don't get to see the behind the scenes side of it. And in a personal journey, that takes a big toll. So I say, really think through that part of it. The second thing, and this should play a decision making immediately, is you need to be all in or all out. There's no 1 foot here and 1 foot there. A lot of people try this side thing going on. Yes, maybe just to get things started and get your financial situation organized, like 6 months, 1 year, fine. But at some point, that decision needs to be taken, because what ends up happening is you're doing disservice to three different things. You're doing disservice to the venture itself, because you're only half in it. You're doing disservice to yourself, because you're only half in it. And you're doing disservice to your current employer, because you're only half in it. And all three are failing, when you have one leg here, one leg there. And I've seen that with a lot of peers, friends, and that's one big pushback. And I tried to do that in the beginning as well. There's one very big pushback from me in terms of guiding principles, all in or all out. And I'm like that pretty much with everything I do. Then this drives my team crazy, because with me, it's all in or all out, and that leads to quick decision making as well. Because if you're gonna do something, do not half-ass it. Do it. And if you're not gonna do it, don't just tease it. Just don't do it. And that's something that as an entrepreneur, I had to learn the hard way early on, but at least now, hopefully, I've figured that out. And that's something that is a very big guiding principle for me. And it also leads to quick decision making, because the biggest asset and resource you have is time. And if you don't use that meaningfully, it's the make or break of any entrepreneurial journey.
Fair enough. No, I think that's, again, a lot of hard-hitting truths that have to be echoed, and it's great to have that mentioned. I think this has been absolutely fantastic, Rohan, and I don't know if this is a fitting end, but one of the great things about Epigamia is also the mission of taking, consumer products from India to the world someday, right? And a lot of that is being championed by Epigamia. We have this new wave of consumer brands championing the cause. What does that mean to you? How is Epigamia achieving it? What do you have to say about that? If you can end with that note and the core motivation that keeps you ticking as an entrepreneur, I think that would sum up what has been a fabulous conversation.
Yeah, so for us, Devraj, it was always make in India for the world. It was very clear that's what we wanted to do. It was even before the coining of that term became. I mean, we talked about this back when we started, even for ice cream, and the idea was it actually started differently. The way it started for us was these products are 100% made in India, and people automatically associate this, especially in the beginning, as an imported product. We have had this big thing, and especially in food, it was something that bothered all of us, that imported food, first of all, doesn't even sound right because it's sitting in ships coming over, so it's definitely not fresh. And secondly, why are we surprised that we can make such amazing quality stuff within the country? The natural resources, the natural ingredients, the fruit, the dairy. And we wanted to set out to sort of solve that and sort of demonstrate that you can make really high quality products in general, but food products right here within the country. And the way we set aside that mission, we set forth on that, is that these products can sit on any shelf anywhere in the world and stand up to their own. It could be in Dubai, it could be in New York, it could be in London, it could be in Singapore. And that's what we set out to do. That feather in our cap came when initially, when we launched with Big Basket years back, we were in their imported section. A lot of grocery stores would put us in their imported section, which is funny because it's an 18-day shelf life in your imported section. Wow, it's like customs clearance is happening very fast for this product. And the reality there was that people actually genuinely thought this product wasn't made in the country. They thought, they couldn't believe that a product of such high caliber could be made within the borders. And that's something that we took personally, and we want to sort of continue demonstrating that. What's changed a little bit for us is that the scale of the scale of business that we now foresee just within India is so high that we see so much, and now especially like we talk about Discovery Ecom, that we've now sort of put even more effort and energy in building out India. We think there's a 11x just to do within the country in the next few years for us. So we've put our energies and efforts there. We still have a pipeline dream of putting this stuff in export. It's not a focus for us, but very clearly the idea was, and it continues to be, that any one of our products can stand up on the shelf anywhere in the world. And I think we've demonstrated that. And that continues to drive us in a big way.
Lovely. I think that's awesome to hear. And we've all seen the amazing products that Epigamia has. Thank you so much, Rohan, for your time. I certainly have learned so much from this conversation about building a consumer brand at the scale that Epigamia has reached. And I'm sure all of us listening in only wish you and the team a lot of success so that we can continue enjoying the amazing products that you have. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Yuvraj. Really appreciate it, and was really happy to be on, and amazing questions.